Today we have a subject that I know for a fact most of you don't care about. We're going to discuss the infantilization of family-friendly video games. Or as my live stream chat likes to call them, baby games. At first, this was going to be a Donkey Kong Bananza review, but, well, as I played it, I realized the game is so incredibly bland that there's no way I could make a vaguely interesting video about it. And it doesn't really seem like many people actually care about the game because they're still pretty pissed at Nintendo for single-handedly driving up the price of video games to $80. And of course, the Switch 2 itself being overpriced, and Donkey Kong Bananza honestly just didn't even really look that interesting outside of the punching through walls gimmick, which many other games have done by now, and arguably better than this game. And as you've probably noticed if you've watched my channel over the years, when I review mid-games, those are usually the least interesting videos. So instead, let's just talk about the death of baby games in general. I don't know if this is yet another sign of the impending idiocracy, or arguably we're already there, but I'm sure all of you have noticed how hand-holdy video games have become over time, whether it's this newest yellow paint phenomenon, or the fact that every single game has to have an at least hour-long tutorial before it lets you play the game. But honestly, I feel like DK Bananza is a new level of stupid that really feels condescending. Now, you could argue a lot of its problems are the same exact problems that Super Mario Odyssey had, and as you might know, I despise Super Mario Odyssey. I think it is the worst 3D Mario game by a significant margin. I know a lot of people like to hate on Super Mario Sunshine for being unpolished, but at least it's a challenging game and has fun, unique mechanics. The only interesting thing about Odyssey was Cappy, and taking over enemies was just so bland and one note. Wasn't really used in any truly interesting way. It was purely surface level. And the reason I bring this up is because if you imagine the Cappy mechanic and then just applied it to all of DK Bananza, you essentially have the game, because punching through walls at first is pretty fun. Destroying the environment in video games is always pretty cool. Red Faction Guerrilla is a great underrated game I reviewed. I think Deep Rock Galactic is a super fun co-op game where the destruction really adds to the shooting experience. Tear Down was a pretty fun indie game where you had to be creative about how you destroy the environment to pull off a heist as fast as possible. But DK Bananza just doesn't feel like it does anything with the mechanic. Instead, this feels like a game for, well, babies, and only babies. If things like Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, those are all considered baby games by my edgelord audience, this would be a fetus game. This is truly one of the most brain-dead games I've ever played, to the point where I was losing brain cells in real time, which led to some, well, kind of hilarious retard moments from me. Because this entire game is just punching through stuff. And it has that same problem Super Mario Odyssey has, where the main collectible of the game feels utterly meaningless. You get one of these bananas every 5 fucking minutes. It's actually unreal. In many cases, it's less than 5 minutes. It's often just 1 minute between each major collectible. Now, of course, the difference in this game compared to Odyssey is that every 5 bananas you collect, you get a skill point. Yes, there's a fucking skill tree in DK Bananza. Nintendo has truly fallen. This has got to be one of the most creatively bankrupt games that they've ever made. But that aside, the skill tree is mostly pointless. Very few of these upgrades feel meaningful on any level except getting more health or slightly upgrading one of your transformations abilities. A lot of the main skill tree's abilities are made completely obsolete by the transformations, and the big Kong and the elephant were really the only ones that enhanced that core destroy the world experience. The zebra just kind of runs fast, and not even like Sonic fast. It's only like 50% faster than DK, it feels like. And the ostrich flies, which completely breaks the already non-existent platforming experience. Yes, I know I said I wouldn't review this game, but I just had to get a little bit of my rage out right there. Really, the true problem here is that this game is just incredibly bland and repetitive because it has no challenge at all. Now, I know some of you who don't really play this genre will say, what are you talking about? All these games are brain dead easy. That is not true at all. Super Mario Sunshine is notoriously difficult at certain points. Yes, that's arguably because of jank reasons like the pachinko machine. But basically, every level that took away FLUDD challenged your basic platforming fundamentals. Now, I will say, Sunshine's controls are not the best. They're definitely not as smooth as some of the other 3D Marios. But for me, at least, it was a pretty refreshing change of pace. It was some much-needed gameplay variety. But I'm not here to sell you on Super Mario Sunshine. A lot of people have decided they just don't like the game that much for various reasons, and I think that's fine. And you can definitely make the argument Donkey Kong is not a Mario game, even if it's made by the Mario Odyssey team, but to me, it feels like it was clearly meant to be Super Mario Odyssey 2 in some ways. My problem is people are not really looking at this realistically. I don't think so-called baby games are even made for children anymore. They feel like they're made for, well, man-children. Which you could certainly consider me one of those, because I still love this genre to this day. The thing is, there's clearly been a change in philosophy at some point at Nintendo. Again, the conspiracy theorist in me says this is to prepare for the global IQ decreasing. So every fucking game has to show you how to put the square peg in the square hole, repeatedly at that. And to bring up a few other obvious examples of this happening in other Nintendo games, we of course have the last several Pokemon generations. Starting with X and Y, Mega Evolutions were basically a free win button from the moment that you obtained your first one in the campaign. You were basically unstoppable, you could one-shot everything. Sun and Moon had what felt like hours of cutscenes. They were hand-holding you throughout that fucking game for like no reason at all. Compare this to Red and Blue, where you could actually do certain gyms out of order, and while it wasn't exactly an open sandbox, you still had to figure out where you were supposed to go and what you were supposed to do. Did any children complain about that growing up? And of course, Scarlet and Violet, ignoring the fact that it's kind of a buggy, unoptimized piece of shit that looks worse than a PS2 game, was also insultingly easy. Another good example, and a long-anticipated sequel for me anyway, that was disappointed with a couple years ago, was Pikmin 4. The dog was the worst idea they ever had. It completely removed the micromanagement aspect of the game of having to actually control your small army and make sure they don't get fucking instantly squished or drowned or choke on poison gas, set on fire, etc., etc. No, everyone just jumps on the dog, and then the dog charges into the big monster, and then they all jump and bash the fucking thing at once, and you kill everything in a matter of seconds. I was so looking forward to the return of dungeons, because Pikmin 2 is my favorite Pikmin. I know a lot of people like 1, I just feel like there isn't enough to it. 2 really fleshed out the core gameplay, the addition of treasures, the removal of the time limit. It made it so that the game could be made more challenging, because since you had no time limit, you had unlimited time to make more Pikmin, so the dungeons could afford to just kill 50 dudes in 1 second if you fuck up. Pikmin 4 is not a bad game by any stretch. It had a lot of content, and the true challenge came from the time management mini-games where you tried to figure out the most efficient way to grab all the treasures in a certain amount of time, but I honestly didn't care for any of that stuff. I liked the dungeon crawling. I honestly kind of regret not reviewing the game, but it was just one of those experiences where it sucks the life out of you, and at the end of it, you kind of just feel nothing, and it's hard to make a video when you're mostly apathetic toward the game, and all things considered, it was fine by today's standards, just not impressive at all. Which again, Pikmin 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, so definitely a huge downgrade. What is even the point of playing these games anymore? What makes them fun? I know I've been the type of guy who says that hard doesn't equal good, but if there's no challenge at all, like not even the slightest bit, then the game's boring. And giving out free cheat codes because some people just can't fucking get good is an embarrassment. It's not like games are even a fraction as hard as they were in the NES days. On my incredibly lazy podcast I do with my brother, we've been slowly making our way through all of the supposed greatest games of all time. And yeah, obviously some of those NES games are hard as hell, but the games I grew up with managed to find a happy medium. Yes, you could argue Spyro is a little bit too easy for most people, people. That's fine, but you're not gonna find anyone who makes that claim about Crash Bandicoot 1. And yet there's plenty of kids who beat Crash Bandicoot back in the day, and none of them bitch about it years later, except, you know, maybe to point out a few super hard levels, like those bridges, for example, always felt a little unfair. I just find it incredibly insulting that people just say, oh, well, these games are made for kids. Of course, they're super easy. There's kids who can beat your ass in Call of Duty or Fortnite right now. Why are we pretending that children are all awful at video games? And again, we had no problem beating a lot of these games as kids as well. Nobody was asking for them to be so brain dead easy. That's why my mind goes to these conspiracy theories. Whether or not they're true doesn't matter, but whatever the excuse is, it's bullshit. They're just making the games worse in the search of the broadest audience possible. This is Nintendo we're talking about. Their games already appeal to basically everybody. So what do they stand to gain from this? Nothing. They only stand to lose. And to touch on another topic that I'm sure many of you were expecting me to cover in detail in this video, yes, part of infantilization is removing all edge from older cartoon-style characters. I don't have to name 1,000 examples here, but I think pretty much everyone has noticed that the subtle differences between the 90s rare DK versus the modern Seth Rogen, harmless, big buffoon DK, and I don't think anybody likes this change. It's obvious that there is a concerted effort to remove any and all rough edges from the old Attitude era of cartoon mascots. I mean, if you take a game like Gex 3, which is clearly supposed to be for all ages, the entire plot of that game is Gex trying to rescue a kidnapped Playboy bunny model, and after every single level, there's a cutscene where he basically says he wants to fuck her. I'm not even joking, dude.
My big, strong Gexy has done it again. Love those bulging biceps.
These biceps are just the beginning, my fair maiden. Speaking of bulging... Did I just say that out loud?
Yep, I'm afraid you did.
Penis.
I'm a bad boy.
That's probably the most extreme example, but, you know, you could name a bunch of other characters like Sonic or Crash Bandicoot. If we move into the 2000s, I think Jack from Jak and Daxter is a really good example, starting with the second game. And a character like Vex absolutely could not even be made today because of how ridiculous it is that it was basically just edgy Super Mario 64. And speaking of Mario, I would even argue Mario had at least the tiniest bit of seriousness to his character in the past, and now he's just full-blown soy boy. I mean, he literally says wowie zowie. But this video is mainly about gameplay, not aesthetics. That's probably worth its own video. But yes, obviously I noticed it. No, I'm not a fan. Moving on. Alright, let's get back to DK Bananza for a little while. As I've touched on, the collectibles feel basically meaningless, and there's a hell of a lot of them, which is going to remind some of you of Donkey Kong 64, arguably the worst 3D platformer that Rare ever made back in the day, and I would say probably the worst collectathon to 100% I've ever personally done in my life. Now, as I said before, the collectibles in this game don't feel nearly as necessary to actually pick up, because bananas are basically completely optional if you're good enough. Not that this game is that challenging to begin with. So you can just gun your way to the next story objective, and the game gives you free bananas as you go anyway. The banana coins are just used to purchase more bananas, and the fossils are used to purchase clothing, which give you buffs. And that's as much detail as I'm going to go into that. When you're not just mindlessly punching through terrain, there is a small amount of platforming in this game. And given that this is a 3D platformer, you would expect the platforming to be a major focus of the level design, and it probably is for about half of the layers, we'll say. But ironically, the parts of this game that feature the most real platforming are often the worst parts of the game because of the transformations. The ostrich and later the snake completely trivialize any challenge that there could have been from platforming. The snake lets you high jump and slow down time, and the ostrich just lets you glide over massive gaps. And this takes no skill at all. And if you're thinking like, well, the transformation is limited, actually, no, not really. The way you fuel the transformations is by collecting gold, and I'd say about 95% of the time, you're going to collect enough gold during the transformation to immediately transform again afterward. And even if you don't, there's an item in the game that lets you transform without having the gold meter full. This is a true fetus game, trust me. And I could excuse some of this if there was any challenge in the game, but there isn't, man. Even when it comes to easy games, there are levels of easy. You have to understand there has to be at least the illusion of challenge for a game to be engaging. You can argue the Spyro games are very easy. You're probably only going to die maybe a handful of times, but there's still the illusion of death because of all the gaps you have to glide over. In DK Bananza, there's a balloon mechanic that saves you from dying from falling off cliffs, and you can hold up to 10 of them. Another huge problem I have with the hand holding is the lack of any true exploration. There's not really any sense of discovery because this game literally has waypoints every 5 fucking minutes. You always know where to go, even though the sandbox isn't even that big. You're gonna figure it out on your own easily. Another thing that annoyed me over time, and I know some people are just gonna say, oh, you could have turned it off in options, is the fact that every time you're near something you can interact with, the button prompt on screen shows. And I don't mean like press A to talk, that's fairly normal. I mean like every time you stand near one of these Void Co things, you gotta sing with Pauline, it says, oh, hold L down to sing every time. It's like, I know how to do this, I've done it 100 times already. And again, that completely brain-dead gameplay loop is the type of thing that truly would only be compelling to young children. But what are young children actually playing? They're playing Fortnite. A lot of them play Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty. And even if they are playing age-appropriate games, it's more likely things like Minecraft or Roblox. The Switch 2 is definitely in the tier of luxury console at this point. Even if you can get it at MSRP, that's what, $500? I had to pay over $600 for mine. There's no fucking kids buying this shit and playing Donkey Kong. Why is Nintendo designing these games exclusively for small children? Now, of course, there's always going to be the argument that this is not for you, which is a lie, given that, again, I love 3D platformers. I mean, for all 5 of you who watch the best part of my best and worst games of each year videos, there's a 3D platform in the top 5 every single year. My top 2 games of last year were Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom, an indie 3D platformer, and Astrobot. So yes, these games are for me. I love this genre, and yeah, I think DK Bananza is incredibly mediocre, repetitive, and bland. I'm basically a baby game expert at this point. I played almost every major 3D platformer and plenty of decently obscure ones. Well, again, you know, the answer is obvious because games are not made for all ages anymore, for the most part. You could definitely argue something like Fortnite is for everyone. Now, me personally, I got sick of Battle Royales probably about 2 years after they got popular, and even then, I didn't play them that much. I probably only put 100 hours into Warzone at most, and barely touched PUBG or Fortnite. But I digress. The point of what I'm saying is, at a certain point, obviously, all of the huge corporations realize the main demographic for video games is 18 to 34, so the vast majority of games are rated M for mature. But there used to be a lot of effort put into these kid-friendly games. I mean, I still remember the mascot era pretty fondly. And there was a point in the early 2000s, at least with PlayStation, where it felt like their mascots were aging with their audience. I mean, with the PS1, we went from Spyro and Crash Bandicoot to then PS2, we had Ratchet & Clank and Jak and Daxter. Basically going from kids to teens, right? Now it feels like these kids games either don't exist at all or are moving backward. And I'm not going to sit here and wank off Astrobot or anything, because I do think the gameplay of that game is a bit lacking, to say the least. But if you compare Astrobot to DK Bananza, at least Astro did have some engaging things going for it. There were a decent amount of gimmicks in that game that at least somewhat enhanced the very simplistic core gameplay loop. There's even cases where a series gets easier as it goes on, but still maintains enough challenge to feel fair and engaging, usually by adding more mechanics. A great example of this is Crash 1 to Crash 2. Crash 2 is much easier than Crash 1, but it's undoubtedly the better game by a mile. And the main reason that Crash 2 is easier is because they added sliding and a high jump you can do immediately afterward. That one move not only makes the platforming feel a lot more precise, but also opens up the opportunity for having a lot more creative level design. And speaking of level design, there is no goddamn level design in DK Bananza. It's these mini sandboxes. Thank God they're not giant empty sandboxes for the most part, so slightly better than what I usually deal with when I review mediocre modern games. But even these mini sandboxes, they just feel so flat. There's like no verticality outside of you can dig underground to find some secrets, but digging through the earth is not level design because you're creating the level, which is just a straight line with no challenges and no enemies. Turning into a big monkey and just punching your way through the earth to get from point A to point B gets boring after 2 to 3 hours. I just can't fucking stand this absolute onslaught of lazy-ass giant empty sandboxes in modern video games, man. I know people used to bitch all the time about, like, corridor shooters in the PS3 era, and don't get me wrong, those do suck. But I think in most cases, having a giant empty sandbox is just objectively worse than having a well-crafted level. I mean, if you imagine any level from Mario 64 and compare that to pretty much any level from Mario Odyssey, I guarantee you can picture that Super Mario 64 level almost perfectly in your memory, whereas the Odyssey one is just a blur. Why? Because Mario 64 has much tighter level design. It's just that simple. And it's even worse in DK Bananza, obviously, for the reasons I already said. I can remember the level themes, but despite just playing these levels, I don't remember anything specific because the platforming doesn't fucking matter. The bananas don't matter either. This is truly one of those games where you could probably just skip almost everything optional and just bum rush your way to the end. And the only challenge you might face is if you didn't upgrade health, because I think all of your other basic abilities could probably easily carry you through this game. The game has a hell of a lot of boss fights, and almost every single one is solved by just punching the thing. And I'm not even saying, like, you have to memorize the boss's attack patterns and then punch. I mean, you run directly up to him and fucking punch him till he dies. But to get back on track here with the point of this video, my only question is, like, who are these games for? Because, again, they're not for children. I don't think there's any parents who are buying their kids a Switch 2, at least probably not until Christmas, where it has some decent games, because I don't hear, like, any buzz about Kong Bananza outside of course, critics giving it a score it doesn't deserve because they suck off every major corporation. I mean, again, Switch 2 sold out almost immediately by the man-baby Disney adult Nintendo audience. So parents are going to have to pay a premium to get this shit just for 2 games, one of which being arguably the worst Mario Kart game in over 20 years. And while, yeah, I'll admit, if I had this game as a kid, I'd probably like it, but what does that matter? I mean, obviously, kids have lower standards for games, but I'm happy that I grew up with a lot of games that game developers truly cared about making a good experience for people of all ages. Now, of course, I realize I'm talking to my audience, who most of which probably wouldn't touch these games as a grown-ass man. Me, I have pretty broad taste. One day I can play Postal 2 and start gunning down civilians, pissing on them, burning them alive, and then an hour later I play Gex 3 and have a great time. I get it, this is more a video for me than it is for any of you guys, let's be real. But I can't help but lament, like, how Nintendo has slowly fallen over time. I know basically every game studio has fallen and billions must die. But there's something about Nintendo, I just feel like they've been slipping and slipping and slipping, and you just hope that they'll recover because you can see that at least some of their games still have a decent amount of soul, you know? I'm one of those people who really did like Breath of the Wild. I've said it a bunch of times. And even Tears of the Kingdom, although it was basically just a copy-paste job with really shitty Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts style mechanics, it was still a decent game. Probably should have just been like an expansion instead of a full experience, but I had fun playing it. Donkey Kong, I can't say I really had fun after like 3 hours in. It was just alright. But yeah, I guess originally I wanted to talk about a bunch of different baby games here, but let's be real, you know, this is definitely the worst example in a long time. Nintendo has clearly just stopped giving a fuck at this point. They know their shit is gonna sell anyway, at least to the Disney adult audience. And yes, some people are gonna say, well, you bought it. It's like, yeah, I'm a video game reviewer. I'm gonna make money off this video. And again, as I've implied in this video, none of you should buy a Switch 2 at all. It's not worth it on any level. I wish that it was. I don't want Nintendo to go to shit. And I can only hope that Metroid Prime 4 and Kirby Air Riders are good, because those are the only Switch 2 games I'm looking forward to. I just fear this game is a sign of things to come. That even the few, like, family-friendly video games that come out anymore have to be dumbed down as much as humanly possible, because our future generations are getting dumber and dumber for reasons I can't say on YouTube, or people say naughty words about me, that I'm a bad person. But again, definitely not implying anything that I'm not allowed to say, of course. I just want games to be fun, man. But as it turns out, making a fun game is difficult even for some of the most legendary studios in the industry these days. So yeah, Nintendo, you've disappointed me yet again, even though my expectations were pretty low this time. At the end of the day, DK Bonanza is not a bad game, but it's completely mediocre and unremarkable, so there's no reason you should play it. That's about it. See you next time, guys.